The halo effect, also sometimes called the halo bias, is a cognitive bias that occurs when people assume that an individual with one known positive characteristic also has other positive characteristics as well. So the perception of one positive characteristic can form a sort of metaphorical halo, which leads to the perception of other positive characteristics. A classic example of the halo effect is when a highly physically attractive person is assumed to be high in other positive traits, as compared to people who are less physically attractive. A study by Dion and colleagues in 1972 found that more attractive people were rated higher on positive traits, such as kindness, warmth, altruism, than less attractive people were. A meta-analysis by Eagly and colleagues in 1981, which examined the effects of attractiveness on person perception across 76 different studies, found that attractive people were perceived as higher on some positive traits, such as social skills, intelligence, but not on all positive traits, such as integrity or concern for other people. So, perceived physical attractiveness can bias perception of some positive traits, but not necessarily all positive traits. So far, we've been discussing the halo effect as it relates to perceptions of another person, but the halo effect can also occur with perception of consumer products. For example, a recent study found that wine that was labeled organic was rated more positively on several traits than the same exact wine that did not have the organic label on it. And you can see from this graph here, ratings that are further out from the circle are higher, and that the wine that was labeled organic, you can see the red there, was rated higher on several of these sensory perception traits than the wine that was not labeled organic. So keep in mind, this is exactly the same wine. The only difference is whether the person tasting the wine believes that it's organic or not. So, what we can take away from this is that believing the wine had one positive characteristic, that is, being organic, and thus presumably of pure and higher quality, biased the sensory perception of other characteristics. So, why does the halo effect occur? So, first, it's important to note that the halo effect does not always occur, okay? But it is more likely to occur under certain circumstances. So, in a review of the halo effect phenomenon by Cooper in 1981, some potential causes of the halo effect were outlined. One source could be if the rater has insufficient knowledge about or is unfamiliar with the person or the object being evaluated, and that's referred to as undersampling. So, for example, in the attractiveness studies, if all you know about a person is that they're physically attractive, which is usually what's done in these studies, the participants are simply looking at a picture of someone who's either very attractive or not very attractive. You don't really have much basis to rate them on other traits, and therefore the halo effect is more likely to happen. So another potential source of the halo effect is referred to as engulfing, which means that distinct traits are collapsed together or engulfed within the perceiver's mind because the perceiver believes that the various distinct traits co-vary with or are related to the salient positive feature that they know about or the overall global impression that they have of that target, be it a person or an object. Lastly, if someone just doesn't really care that much about evaluating something or rating something on various traits, if they lack that motivation, that could also increase the likelihood of the halo effect as well. Additionally, if someone does not have or does not want to expend cognitive resources or cognitive effort on evaluating something, the halo effect bias could be more likely to occur as compared to someone who does put forth cognitive effort. And this sort of ties into these two broad sort of information processing strategies. the heuristic versus the systematic. A heuristic processing style is one that is kind of superficial, shallow. It doesn't require much cognitive effort, and it's more prone to cognitive biases. Compare that to the systematic information processing, which is a much more deep, effortful, attentive, analytical type of thinking and information processing. And that type of processing is less prone to cognitive biases. So, one way to potentially reduce the halo effect is to engage in an analytical and effortful, systematic information processing style. In conclusion, the halo effect is a cognitive bias that occurs when an individual unjustifiably assumes that because someone or something has one positive trait, he or she or it must also have some other positive traits. So it's just one of many different cognitive biases that humans are susceptible to, and it can have a meaningful effect in many different real life situations, such as job interviews or dating. In both of those contexts, you're being evaluated by another person who doesn't really know you all that well. So the first impressions you make can have a big impact because that could influence how they evaluate you on various other characteristics. So that's why people always say, dress nicely for your interviews or smell good for your dates, dress nicely for your dates because your first impression can have a big impact.